The South Tower as well as an adjoining building. Some 50,000 people worked in this complex. As I look behind me tonight, a disturbing sight. And after we look at this shot, we will try to fast forward to this evening. No trace of what used to be the tallest buildings in New York City, just a smoldering black hole. The Empire State Building, now the tallest building in the city. The strikes happened 18 minutes apart, the first one at 8:45. By 10:30, both towers had collapsed. An untold number of victims are still trapped inside the wreckage of the building. Mayor Giuliani and the police chief confirming they believe there are people who are still alive. Unfortunately, rescue workers cannot get to them at this hour because of falling debris, because of smoke, and because of structures of buildings that might continue to collapse. Mayor Giuliani said the death toll could be horrendous. He said the numbers are going to be very, very high. What we can tell you tonight is the city is confirming that some 265 firefighters are believed to be dead. The police chief saying among the dead, the chief of the fire department as well as the deputy chief, some 85 police officers missing tonight. CNN's Peter Viles takes us back to the start of this dreadful day. I need to warn you, the pictures are graphic. Some of you might find them disturbing.
Just before 9 a.m. Eastern, Americans awakened to shocking pictures from New York.
I just saw the entire top part of the World Trade Center explode.
Minutes earlier at 8:45, a hijacked plane had slammed into one of the World Trade Center towers. 9:03 a.m., a sickening sight.
Oh my God!
A second plane crashes into the Trade Center.
See the damage to that about the middle of the building. Just incredible what we are witnessing here.
People on the ground look on in horror as workers in the Trade Center towers fall, or maybe even jump, to their deaths. 9:30 a.m., the president in Florida.
Today we've had a national tragedy. Two airplanes have crashed into the World Trade Center in an apparent terrorist attack on our country.
The airport's being evacuated. They need to go home.
9:40, all American airports have been closed, but there are still planes in the sky. And minutes later, one of them crashes into the Pentagon.
Several Army officers I talked to reported hearing a big explosion, seeing shards of metal.
9:59, as the Pentagon burns, the South Tower of the World Trade Center buckles and collapses. 10:29, the second Trade Center tower collapses. An American landmark is in ruins.
Here it comes. I'm getting behind a car.
Thousands feared dead, lower Manhattan shrouded in smoke and debris. 10:48, police in western Pennsylvania confirmed that a fourth hijacked plane crashed a half hour earlier outside Pittsburgh.
Enormous loss of life there.
Noon, shock and disbelief. As the dead and wounded are taken to East Coast hospitals, officials in New York and Washington report a shortage of blood and appeal to Americans to donate their blood. Late afternoon, New Yorkers are evacuating lower Manhattan by the thousands. Parts of the city unrecognizable. A third building at the Trade Center, this one 47 stories, collapses. At Bellevue Hospital, an official says, quote, "It is a catastrophe of unparalleled proportions." Peter Viles, CNN, New York.
And if you were with us through Mayor Giuliani's news conference, you can see how tough it is for anybody to sort out the magnitude of what this city endured as well as what Washington endured today. I was on the phone earlier with a city official who believes the death toll will go into the thousands. Once again, that is impossible to even get a sense of the number of injuries and the number of deaths because of the fact that rescuers simply cannot get in to that perimeter area surrounding the World Trade Center because of fears of further structural collapse. I wanted to let you know what we can also tell you New Yorkers can expect in the morning. The city from 14 14th Street down will be closed off to civilians at least until Thursday. All New York City public schools, parochial schools, and private schools will be closed tomorrow. All, as I mentioned, all businesses below 14th Street will be closed as well. The nation's airports have been completely shut down at least until noon Eastern on Wednesday. The stock markets, as you can see on the screen, will also be closed. And you know that the news from the Asian markets that are now opening is not good, opening to a 17-year low. But once again, New Yorkers are going to wake up to a skyscape they barely recognized. The two towering World Trade Towers no longer exist. And Wolf, throughout the next hour, we will hope to be bringing you more information from some of the trauma centers in the area that are trying to treat patients. We know for a fact some 300 victims are being treated at St. Vincent's Hospital, and we're going to go to our reporter live there to get a better sense of what their condition is at the moment.
On some other stations, we will not see until sometime tomorrow morning. I'm Dan Rather in New York.
Surreal. Surreal.
No matter how many times you see it,
It's incredulous.
too hard to fathom.
Incredulous.
Let's go back to Cindy Hsu, who is...
Center. They're making a video for training purposes. The New York City Fire Department.
Now watch the firefighter here. Obviously they hear a low-flying jet. You see, watch him. You can hear it. He looks up. They catch it on the video. Incredible.
That is just amazing. That is just amazing video.
And of course, about 18 minutes later, another commercial jet flies into the other tower. And before the end of the morning, they were both completely obliterated.
And of course, that second jet was broadcast live.
Yes, we were sitting
looking
right
at the
here.
Scene,
Didn't even realize it at first because we were so focused on the building that was already in flames.
Suddenly exploded.
Yeah.
Building number 2. Joining us right now is Dr.
Because you're going to die anyway if you do what they're telling you to. And we have a great sense in airline piloting of not only keeping the folks on board our aircraft safe, but we're talking about the folks on the ground too. And we really have a great sense of that. It's instilled in us. You wouldn't want to do that, and you know that it would just be a to heck with you. We're going to struggle it out right here situation.
Wouldn't want to do that. Wouldn't want to do that, and wouldn't do it. I can't believe for a minute that a pilot would. So they had to have controls of those planes. Before we let you go, I want to ask you one other question, though.
You could lure one out, so to speak, by threatening the flight attendants in the back.
Well, as we say, they knew what they were doing, because if they were able to turn the transponders off and able to prevent the pilots from sending what is a very simple signal which alerts air traffic controllers that there's a hijacking in place, if they were able to prevent that, they had a lot of sophistication about how those planes operated. And the scenes that those pilots must have gone through, John, I know it must sicken you, and it does everybody
Charlie,
else.
it's a matter of perspective. I mean, it's hard for me even to think about the perspective of the fact that you and I, Diane, you and I too, will sit here sometimes and talk about a terrible airline crash. Fortunately, it's been nice and quiet for the last year, but we'll be talking about one. We had 4
off from Boston, headed for the West Coast. They had, what, how many gallons of jet fuel on board?
Around close to 10,000 gallons for the 757, close to 14,000 gallons for the 767. That's not precise, but it's in that general vicinity. Burned that down about 1,000 for the distance they traveled. But that too had to be by design, Charlie. And on top of that, you know, I didn't know until yesterday. I'm not a structural guy for buildings, but I didn't know that the way to bring down a building like this was to fly something in at an upper level and create a heck of a fire like that. I would have thought that you'd blow it from the bottom. So these people knew exactly what to do, how to do it, and they set this thing up with incredible precision.
Yes.
There wasn't anything casual about this operation.
And with that amount of jet fuel, temperatures in those upper floors, 16,000 degrees they talked about. We're going to go, thanks very much.
He actually started to experience some distress once we got down to
You
the
talk
bottom.
very matter-of-factly of walking down 81 flights of stairs, but obviously you're encountering, you said it's very orderly, and there's a marvelous way that people respond, that they're sort of in shock and they just do it right.
The 30s maybe about 30 minutes into our trip down was when the firemen started coming up and were literally collapsing on the stairs from the combination of their climb plus the load that they were carrying. I and a few of us around the 27th floor had to actually assist the firemen bringing oxygen tanks and their hoses up, about 2 or 3 flights.
That building was hit at 8:45.
Correct.
I have the time written down somewhere when it actually collapsed. I think it was 9:50 something when it actually. I'm sorry. How soon before it went down did you get out?
Well, my building, it's strange because my building, tower number 1, was the first to be struck. It was the second of the 2 to collapse. I had been out on the street not even a minute. I had made my way 1 block over to Broadway. I was out less than a minute when number 2 came down, and several of us thought that we were being shot at from above. We didn't know what was happening.
I was going to say, I think it was close to 10 o'clock, 9:59, when that first one collapsed, and then about 28 minutes passed, or a little bit past, when the second one did. Well,
watch, and we have decided not to show them, but people did jump. They had to jump, and it's horrible to see. Were either of you there? Did you see it?
I actually was down by Water Street by the FDR Drive when I just actually got off the phone with my relatives, just telling them I was okay, and I saw the building go down, and it was the most frightening. You'll never forget that image, for the rest of your life. Just when I got home, so many.
We can keep talking.
For roughly the first 24 hours,
a huge explosion now raining debris on all of us.
Every image spoke of destruction.
We better get out of the way!
Confusion.
Get out of here!
Vulnerability. And darkness. Darkness especially over the questions of who flew those planes into the towers and how did they take control of them and why.
The Department of Justice has undertaken perhaps the most massive and intensive investigation ever conducted in America.
Today, U.S. authorities said they made progress on answering some of those questions. Some of what they were up to we could see. Late last night, the FBI seized a car parked near the American Airlines terminal at Boston's Logan Airport. This was ABC News at sunrise this morning.
And it is believed that that vehicle was being driven by at least some of these suspects. And we're getting further information about that. The Boston Herald is reporting that of those suspects, that they believe one of them was a trained pilot. And again, consistent with what George was saying just a few minutes ago, that some of these suspects flew to Boston early Tuesday morning from Portland, and that they had entered this country from Canada.
The FBI also identified a hotel that one team spent the night in South Portland, Maine. 2 suspects left another rental car in Maine and were seen on videotape.
I can tell you that the 2 individuals are both males in their mid to late 30s, based on the photo that I saw, and that each one was carrying some type of small shoulder bag, not a real bulky one, but something small. Both kind of dark complected, dark hair.
Also this morning in Coral Springs, Florida, neighbors reported that FBI agents overnight raided a house listed as the address for a man named Mohammed Atta, an Egyptian who was believed to be a hijacker on one of the jets that rammed the World Trade Center. They got the address from Atta's driver's license. He is a known associate of Osama bin Laden. While in Florida, Atta was trained as a pilot by this flight instructor.
We're looking as a commercial outfit in the United States to train people. And if these people come with the right paperwork, immigration, etc., passports, then we did our job and we want to train them.
This morning, the president was on television.
The American people need to know we're facing a different enemy than we have ever faced. This enemy hides in shadows and has no regard for human life. This is an enemy who preys on innocent and unsuspecting people then runs for cover. But it won't be able to run for cover forever.
By noon today, some of the shadow apparently lifted. ABC News had learned that the FBI now knew the identity of all of the hijackers, at least 12 of them, from countries that included Saudi Arabia and Egypt.
The 4 planes were hijacked by between 3 and 6 individuals per plane, using knives and box cutters, and in some cases making bomb threats. Our government has credible evidence that the White House and Air Force One were targets. A number of the suspected hijackers were trained as pilots in the United States.
We have, in the last 24 hours, taken the manifests and used those as an evidentiary base, and have talked to many of the families of the victims, and have successfully, I believe, identified many of the hijackers on each of the 4 flights that went down.
Also today, the Boston police raided a hotel, detained 3 people, 2 women and a man. Outside Providence, Rhode Island, they stopped an Amtrak train and took away 1 man. Late afternoon at the White House, the president's spokesman goes public with what before had been only a rumor.
We have specific and credible information that the White House and Air Force One were also intended targets of these attacks.
The plane in question is the one that ultimately flew into the Pentagon. Early this evening, investigators were dusting for fingerprints at the check-in counters at Dulles International Airport. Now what happened yesterday makes a little more sense, the way that people were at first evacuated from the White House rather casually, and then when it was realized one of the planes was headed their way, people were told to drop everything and run, and they did. And if Air Force One was a target, it also explains why the president hopscotched around the South for several hours yesterday, escorted by jet fighters, before returning to Washington. Add to all this searches of several houses in at least 3 states, and late tonight another one in Hamburg, Germany.
Auf die Anschläge auf das World Trade Center und das Pentagon verwickelt gewesen sein. Über die Art der Tatbeteiligung konnte noch nichts gesagt werden, aber die
And Ted, we have search warrants being executed overnight in Florida, New Jersey, and Massachusetts, and as we've said, other states. As far as we know, no arrest warrants have been issued. And there are just so many moving parts to this tonight that there were some of it we decided to discuss outside of the report because it's a little bit slippery. But that raid on the hotel in Boston, it's not really at all clear what happened there. They were led to the hotel reportedly by some information they picked up in one of the rental cars, led them to a specific hotel room there, and agents were surprised when they reached the room they were looking for, opened the door, and 3 people walked out. They detained those people, the 2 women and 1 man that we referred to. They have not arrested them, they have detained them, and it's not clear whether these people were involved or not. In fact, in all of these cases, of all of the people detained today, they're still not saying that they know whether or not for sure that they are suspects. They believe that they may have some link to Osama bin Laden, but they're not sure. Also want to point out, in one sense you can say it's amazingly quick response to already know, they say, the names of all of the hijackers. On the one hand, that is amazing, but what is also amazing is the implication of the fact that these men were receiving pilot training in the United States. Some of them were certified as pilots in the United States over a period that lasted at least a year. They've been here, they've been registered, they've been using their names and addresses and driver's licenses, which is allowing them, authorities now, to track these people to where they actually lived and where they went to school. And they got away with it for all that period of time. Even though a lot of them were known associates of Osama bin Laden and were on watch lists, they weren't being watched at the right time.
Actually, John, you touched on the very question I was just about to raise with you, and I'm going to be asking questions of all of our colleagues tonight, some of which you're not going to be able to answer. But 2 of those people, as you correctly point out, were on an FBI watch list. Is there any explanation yet as to how and why they were able to get into the country?
All we've heard are theories that they may have come in through Canada, they may have been smuggled in, they may have come in using false identity. But even if they came in under false identity or slipped into the country, they very quickly established what you might call
standard legal identity. And we're filling out forms with the FAA to apply for pilot's licenses. So no, we don't have an answer to that.
John, I'll be coming back to you several times before our block of programming is over this evening, but thank you for what you've just reported. Nightline's Dave Marish is on the streets of New York City, just a few blocks from the site of the search and rescue effort. And Dave, at times like this, all I can say is, what can you tell us?
Ted, about 5 blocks from here, about 5 blocks south of here, in the absolute center of a brightly flood-lit disaster area, is a large firefighter with an almost as large magnetic whiteboard in front of him that has hundreds of numerical units on it in several colors. These just some of the many units of the New York Fire Department, Police Department, and dozens of other law enforcement and emergency service agencies from the whole metropolitan area that cover this area. It looks something like an anthill because the people are dwarfed by the massive size of the wreckage. When a 1,350-foot tower comes down, even in pieces, it makes a mountainous wreckage. It is at least 60 or 70 feet high, and behind its crest, a big black cloud of smoke continues to rise from what can literally be called the well of the world's sorrows. 82 people are known to have died here. The mayor of New York has requested 6,000 body bags. Those two numbers give you, I think, a very good sense of how little has been penetrated of this wreckage and how much more horror there is to be uncovered.
David, I want to move around to a number of our colleagues this evening, but before I let you go for the moment, and I should point out that we'll be coming back to you again also, when you spoke of the 80 known dead, you do not mention, of course, the firemen and the policemen who we know have died in the wreckage. Just a quick word on them. Lord knows they deserve mention at the top of this broadcast.
They certainly do, Ted. 202 New York City firefighters are still missing. 57 police officers, 200 other state employees. And I must say that missing must be presumed dead now. To see this wreckage, to have looked at this massive pancaking of floors and window frames compressed into, as I say, still a pile 50, 75, 80 feet high, but that was once 1,350 feet high. The vertical compression of the collapse of this building almost certainly has killed everyone who was within it. One note, though, Ted, that I want to pass on. The largest single renter in the World Trade Center, with 21 floors occupied by 3,500 employees. Morgan Stanley, the financial business company, reported that most, no hard number here, but most of their 3,500 employees on 21 floors in the area that was struck by the plane escaped this building and are alive tonight.
And one of the biggest jobs over these next few days, and this is one instance in which the internet is going to be of enormous value, and maybe we can talk about that a little bit later too, is that people now are trying to find out quite literally by making contact and asking those who have survived to let people know. The compilation of lists is going to be, in many respects, the principal focus of this effort over the next few days. Dave Marish was talking just a moment ago about how the wreckage looks from the outside. We're going to get an extraordinary look now at how it looks from the inside. I'd like to turn to my Nightline colleague Michelle Martin in New York, who is joined by an amateur photographer who has some extraordinary video. Michelle?
Ted, I'd like to introduce you to Tim Cothran, who's actually a professional video journalist. He is a freelancer for ABC, and he was able to get inside what we are all calling ground zero of the World Trade Center today. And as you pointed out, he has some rather extraordinary video that we would like to show you now. We've condensed it, obviously, quite a bit. He shot about an hour of it, more than an hour. And Tim, why don't you tell us what we're seeing here? And about what time did you go in?
I started shooting tape about 2:30 in the afternoon. We entered the big atrium of the old the financial center, and this atrium used to be absolutely gorgeous. But in order to get to the wreckage, we had to go through this other building. At the top of these stairs, there was some graffiti that was actually written in the sand that's everywhere as a dedication to the brothers of all the firemen, and they all consider themselves brothers. And it's very, very important to them that they be remembered. And I thought that was a very special thing there.
What are we hearing here?
Well, a lot of saws, a lot of hubbub. And you walk forward, and here's this panoramic window of this vast, vast, vast destruction and all this activity going on outside.
What was the temperature like in there? Was it hot? Was it uncomfortable to be in there?
No, well, you know, we've been very fortunate that these days have been so beautiful in New York City. So it was eerie. Here you were in this enormous amphitheater of destruction, and it was just one of the nicest days of the year. But a tremendous amount of sawing and banging. And the guys work in teams, they help each other out. Sometimes if they find a particularly hot or interesting spot, they'll work in groups of 10 or a dozen. And it's all hands-on work. They're not using any heavy tools here, as you can see. They're going bit by bit. It's arduous, it's hard, and these guys are putting all their effort into it.
It also seems rather dangerous. I see many jagged pieces of metal. Did you have a sense of being in danger while you were on top of the rubble?
There's tons and tons of broken glass all over the place. I only had tennis sneakers on, so I was pretty worried. But you picked where you walked, and you just choose where you stepped.
What are we seeing here?
Well, this is poignant in that this is a fire truck. This is a badly charred fire truck. And it's one of the few things in this valley that has been actually kind of cleaned off and hosed off. Because it means a lot to these guys. I mean, you can see it's absolutely destroyed. The tires are burned, all the rigging is destroyed. And they're using it sort of as a table, as a setup area. And it really means a lot to them. It's a staging area, as well as a place where some people get very, very emotional because a lot of guys died here. A lot.
And paying their respects.
And paying their respects.
Even as they continue to do the job to which they've been assigned today.
Absolutely.
Did you have a sense of being very far up? Did you have a sense of being a couple of stories up atop the rubble there?
It was really hard to gauge elevation because you're surrounded by some high pieces as well. You're sort of just this sensation of being in something of a valley. And it's just everything is smashed to atoms. There are no big pieces of anything.
And I think that this photograph speaks for itself. I think that everyone will recognize what is occurring here, that the remains of someone are being removed.
Exactly. In the 2 hours that I was there, I saw at least 10 body bags being lifted out, and they seemed to find 2 and 3 sets of remains, and they used dogs. They called the dogs in, and the dogs have been there for, I'm sure, quite some time. In fact, before I left, they actually retired the dogs. The dogs actually got very fatigued, and they gave them the afternoon off, or the rest of the afternoon, which they certainly deserved. And they helped pick up body scents and so forth.
A sight that has become rather familiar from disasters in which Americans have volunteered around the world, but not one I think Americans expect to see here.
Just everybody pitching in, you know, it's the bucket brigade syndrome where guys just move stuff out, they move it to the outside. And it was really hard because even though this disaster only happened a day ago, these cadavers are starting to decompose, and it was hard. It was hard for everybody, and it made everybody realize that it's only going to get worse in coming days. These guys work in teams. They'll investigate a nook, a cranny. They'll put their heads together and come up with a plan.
And they're crawling under rather large slabs of plaster and concrete and metal. They don't seem very well protected.
Well, that's their job. They love it. They do it. There they are, scaling up enormous pieces of debris. And so as I was leaving, at about 5:15, everyone started running.
A sudden change of energy here. What's going on?
Absolutely. They got a call on the phone, over the horn, that the structure that was adjacent to us was unstable and may come down. So I hit the record button and started running along with everyone. We took a breath here to see if there was anything else going on, and then we suddenly heard this rumble, which you may hear on the tape, and it scared me to death. And that was it. We just bolted. The 60 pounds of gear I had on me weighed nothing. We just flew out of there, scared to death.
And when did you begin to calm back down? How long did it take before your heart rate came back down and you...
Well, I'll tell you what, watching this stuff brings it right back up. I'll tell you that. And it makes you realize what these guys and women are doing and how much it means to them.
Ted, as I said, some rather extraordinary footage from Tim Cothran, freelance video journalist, a freelancer for ABC, and I can tell you that he's still actually covered with plaster dust, and the smell of smoke still clings to him. Ted?
John Donvan just called in, and I'm getting the information from New York. I have forgotten, I knew it, but forgotten that both John's father and your father were New York City firemen. Just keep talking for a moment, because I know this is close to home, and there is one aspect of this story that the two of you have not spoken about, and just keep talking, if you would, about the possibility of survivors and what is being done to find people who might still be there.
Well, Ted, as I wasn't going to mention this, but the reality is my father is a retired New York City fireman, and my brother is an active fireman, and I can tell you that on Tuesday morning, my first thought was of him, and thankfully he called very early, and I was able to assure the rest of the family that he was safe. So, of course, it's ironic to be thinking first of my father at a time like this, and then of my brother, who like many firemen, is second generation, carrying on that tradition, because, as Tim said, they love it. They love the serving the public, and tough on the rest of us, but we appreciate the job that they do, as I think John does also.
I'd like you to pick up, though, on the notion of there may still be, as we have seen from all the earthquakes that we've covered over the years and other instances of terrorism where there are collapsed buildings, people can survive for extraordinary periods of time. Would the two of you just talk a little bit about what is being done to look for survivors?
Well, if John would, I don't know if John would like to pick up, but well, as Tim showed us, that they're working very carefully.
No, I didn't mean John.
I'm sorry.
I'm sorry, Michelle.
I'm sorry.
We've got this little bit of a delay here. I wanted you to talk to Tim, exactly.
Oh, Tim, I'm sorry. Go ahead. I think, as you heard, Ted would like to expand more about what the efforts are being made to search for survivors.
Every effort's being made to search for survivors. In fact, shortly after I got there, there was some talk, some commotion about over in a far southeast corner that they thought that there was some sounds. So, it's tough. It's really tough. But these guys are keeping the hope alive.
The other thing I think that's interesting to point out is that there isn't a lot of heavy equipment, and I think that can be puzzling to people, except if you consider that one of the only hopes that survivors have is that they're trapped in an air pocket where perhaps there's a conjunction of heavy pieces of material. So one of the challenges for rescuers is to try to move as much heavy equipment, or rather heavy pieces of rubble, as they can without destroying the very thing that is keeping survivors alive. And I think that's one of the reasons you do not see large pieces of equipment rolling willy-nilly across those piles of rubber, and why so much work is being done by hand.
Absolutely. It's all saws and cutting torches, and as you saw, buckets and gloved hands.
And I think the silence too becomes important, because that's the only way that rescuers who are understandably running on adrenaline themselves, who are working in teams, can listen for the sounds of survivors. In fact, I think that is what becomes eerie at a moment like this, is just the amount of silence, or just the quality of the silence that so many people working so hard are able to achieve for the purpose of finding people. We also have heard reports of people on cell phones trying to call people to see if they can achieve some help in locating them, but the phone service here has been very spotty, in part because the World Trade Center tower was where the antennas were. So it's a very awful situation under the best of circumstances, but it's also, I think this, as Tim was pointing out, this weird confluence of sort of horror and the kind of heartwarming effect of so many people working together for this purpose. And you saw that today.
It's a tremendous effort, and it just made me realize how long it's going to take to get all that stuff out of there.
How long had many of those men been working without sleep?
I couldn't tell you, except that they're in there and they have their schedules, and they're in there every day for whatever it is, 6-7 hours at least, I'm sure. But they're rotating them now. I mean, they can't burn them out. They have a long road.
And of course, one of the more poignant moments for all of us are seeing remains being removed in these body bags. And without being indelicate, I'd like to ask if any of the rescuers, do you happen to know whether they knew any of the men whom they were removing from that scene?
I don't know about that, but the remains were in pretty bad shape, and at least while I was there, I wasn't aware of any firefighters or EMT types being removed, no.
Tim Cothran, thank you very much for bringing this video to us and for talking with us this evening. Ted?
Michelle, thank you. The intersection of so many different stories, from the rescue story to the ongoing story of what is, after all, in addition to being a terrorist attack, also one of the biggest crime stories that the world has seen. The FBI director indicated today just how seriously he and his people are taking the investigation into yesterday's acts of terrorism. 4,000 FBI agents, that's more than a third of the total force, have now been assigned to this case. Another 3,000 support personnel are assisting, many at the crime scenes in New York, Washington, and Pennsylvania. Joining us now from Memphis, Tennessee tonight, Weldon Kennedy. He is the former deputy director of the FBI, who was special agent in charge of the FBI's investigation into the Oklahoma City bombing. And joining us from our Washington bureau tonight, retired General Wayne Downing, who was commander-in-chief of the Joint Special Operations Command. He conducted the military's investigation into the terrorist attack on the Khobar Towers in Saudi Arabia. I scarcely know how to begin or where to begin, but perhaps that is the best way to start this conversation. From the FBI's point of view, how do you begin to impose order on something that by its very definition is absolute chaos?
Ted, that is extremely difficult. You start by taking one step at a time, and you see an investigation like this, as happened in Oklahoma City. You first develop one lead. That lead develops 2, 3, 4, or 5 additional leads. Each one of those develop 3, 4, or 5 additional. It's a geometric explosion of the investigation. That's precisely what happened in the Oklahoma City case, and from what I'm seeing from the news coverage, is what's happening in this case. They started by finding an automobile in a parking lot at Logan Airport in Massachusetts. That has developed a number of leads. Another vehicle was located in Maine. From those leads, they were able to develop the Florida information. Now we see that over 400 agents are involved in pursuing the leads developed in Florida. And this will continue as this case grows. In Oklahoma City, similarly, within 48 hours, we similarly had thousands of FBI agents literally all over the world working leads on the case.
Is there, General Downing, at a point like this, an intersection of responsibilities between those who are investigating the crime and those, in this case the military, who would be responsible for some kind of a military reaction? In other words, are you guys in situations like this talking to each other, or is each group independently proceeding without regard to what the other is doing?
Well, I think there is definitely some coordination, but one of the things that we've had to consider in the past is that the military does not interfere with the FBI's criminal investigation. I think in this case, we get into the old argument, is a terrorist act a crime or is it an act of war? And the answer is it's both, and it depends upon how the country wants to address it. We hear a lot of talk right now that this was an act of war and that war has begun. I would say war has probably begun on terrorism, certainly way before this, but this event completely changes the character. Certainly the FBI is going to have to be circumspect as to how they handle evidence, how they handle information, but my experience is there's an extremely good relationship between the FBI and the CIA. They have good people swapped in each agency working the terrorist problem, and certainly I think the kind of information that the military needs and that the CIA needs in order to develop the targets that we might want to strike, I feel confident that information will flow freely in this case.
When you talk about talk of war, it's more than just random talk of war. Sometimes we in the press are talking about war. Sometimes the public and Congress begins to talk about war. But today we have a situation where the Commander-in-Chief is referring to this as a war, where the Secretary of State, himself a former general, is talking about this as a war.
Correct.
Define for us what that means. We use that term kind of loosely, and I have a fear that because many of our young people have never had the experience, that they don't know how long a war can last and that they don't know how complicated and how bloody it can get. Give us a sense of both of those things, will you?
A war implies that we're going to have a strategic aim. And just stating that and honing in on what it really means is important, and it takes some effort. And then in order to prosecute this war, we are going to have a series of campaign plans, of which the military campaign plan is just one of the campaign plans. And then in that campaign plan, you're going to have to fight a series of battles. And as I mentioned earlier with Peter Jennings, this thing, is not going to be without setbacks. I mean, we're going to do things. We want to reach out. We want to strike these terrorists and whoever are supporting them. But we should not be naive that they're not going to retaliate and they're not going to anticipate some of the things we're going to want to do. And this isn't going to be over in a month or 2 months or 6 months, but this may well take years. And so this is serious business. This is hard work. And we've got to gear up just like those emergency crews and firemen down there in the World Trade Center area. We've got to gear up just like they are for the long haul on this business.
This is where I think we have to start talking about the intersection of responsibilities between the military and the FBI and the CIA. You've already alluded to that. And Mr. Kennedy, we have been focusing, as is natural, on the investigation into who committed this crime. But the FBI, as the sort of federal police force in the United States, also has the responsibility now, and it's a heightened responsibility, of helping to protect the American people against anything further happening in the future. And we have just heard the projection that this is going to go on for months, possibly years. How is that going to change the way that the FBI does its job? And what, if anything, is the FBI going to need, perhaps even in terms of modifying or changing some of the laws that exist?
Ted, I'm not sure that it would change the method by which the FBI would pursue this investigation. I believe they will be pursuing this investigation as they would any major case, and that is take the leads, take the case wherever the facts take them. If it takes it to an international arena where there's a large number of conspirators, perhaps even some state or nation involvement, so be it. There would be a complete and total exchange of that information developed with the CIA, with the military, and of course with the government. If, on the other hand, you have the situation like in Oklahoma City, where it turned out to be 4 or 5 individuals who knew anything about the case, and there was no other involvement other than those 3 or 4 individuals. It'd be difficult to describe that as a war. If, on the other hand, this case or another one like it takes the investigation and involves many people from many nations, then you may indeed go into the war footing or the war description, as has been alluded to. But suffice it to say that the investigation will proceed in whatever direction the leads take it until there's a full development of all the facts.
What I'm asking you to talk about a little bit, and you've begun to do that, but I'd like you to take it a little bit further. The country is in pain right now. The country is hurting. The country is angry. There will be political pressure. It is all too easy for a nation that has spent more than 200 years developing its democratic freedoms to say, let's set them aside. There's nothing more important right now than finding the people responsible for this and reacting against the people who were responsible. And I would just like you to talk, because there is talk already in Congress, as you know, about the possibility of giving our intelligence agencies more power than they have had in the last few years, of perhaps giving our police forces more power than they have had in the last few years. There's always an upside and a downside to these things. Just reflect on that for a moment, would you?
Yes, there is, Ted, but this country over its history has never gone to the extent of having a national police force. I think earlier on in the program there was reference to the FBI as being a national police force. The FBI has never regarded itself in that capacity. In fact, J. Edgar Hoover and every director has maintained very publicly that the FBI is not a national police force. It does have national responsibilities, and it executes and carries out those responsibilities to the full extent that it's capable of doing, and doing very, very well. But it is not a national police force. I really don't believe that the people of this country, in spite of the anger that they now feel, which is totally justified, will throw everything out the window, all of our principles, our beliefs, and go into a complete mode of revenge and do things that are not warranted or called for by our Constitution and by the way in which we believe we conduct ourselves as a people.
General Downing, one more broad line of questioning that I'd like to engage in with you, and that is, over the past 50 years, growing out of the post-World War II period and the U.S.-Soviet adversary-like relationship that existed for so many years, we were preparing for a different kind of war. We are the world's greatest nuclear power. We have the world's most powerful Air Force, the world's most powerful Navy. That's not the kind of war that we're talking about right now, is it? And I guess my question to you is, do we have the right machinery and the right strategy and the right people for fighting this kind of a war?
Well, the paradigm has changed, Ted. There's no doubt about it. I think in a lot of cases we look back 12 years to the fall of the Berlin Wall as kind of the good old days. We knew what we were up against. We had a monolithic communist enemy. We in the U.S. military were oriented on attacking the Soviet Union from 360 degrees, 24 hours a day, in as great a depth as we could, and it really gave us a focus. And when that situation fell apart, and then of course, the Berlin Wall fell on the 9th of November, 1989, an event I'll never forget, and followed very closely within about a year with the collapse of the Soviet Union. This entire model shifted, and we all of us, I think, breathed a deep sigh, saying, well, now finally we're going to get a peace dividend, we can reorient ourselves. We very quickly found ourselves involved in a war out there in the desert in Iraq, where we achieved a stunning victory. And of course, we displayed to the world our capabilities and our competence. And I think we told any enemy that if they were going to take us on, that was not the way to do it. And then from this arose this concept of an asymmetric threat. People not going after our strengths, not confronting us in areas where we could put our strengths against them, but attacking us in ways where we were not strong, where we had weaknesses. And I think what we saw yesterday was an ultimate manifestation, beyond, I think, what any of us dreamed possible, where we had a terrorist group attack us with what can only be called weapons of mass destruction because of the incredible amount of not only casualties, but who could have foreseen that they could drop the Twin Towers? I mean, I couldn't. I couldn't see that they could do that. And so what we see now is an enemy demonstrating that they can attack us in ways which, while we have been prepared, we've talked a lot about it, we've done a lot of studies on it, in the last just 3 or 4 years, we haven't taken some of those real tough steps to prepare ourselves for this new world and this new threat. And you know, why haven't we, Ted?
How do you, well, I forgive me, and yeah. I'm going to keep pointing out during the evening, there's a little bit of a time delay between London and back there in the United States, so it's sometimes we step on each other a little bit, and I apologize to you for doing that. How do you fight a war against an enemy who doesn't acknowledge his own existence? In other words, no one has taken responsibility for this attack so far, so who is the enemy? Where is the enemy? I think we throw the name Osama bin Laden around as much as anything else because it gives a personification to what is otherwise just a bunch of people in shadow.
Right. Well, listen, I think we are a very adaptable people. I think the Americans we're creative. We are adaptable. We can change, and I think we have changed, and we continue to change. I fully believe that the investigation that's going on right now with the FBI, as Mr. Kennedy describes it, I think certainly the actions of our intelligence agencies, all of them, led by the DCI, are very quickly going to identify for us who the perpetrators of this were, and I think we've got some very good means of determining what the linkages are, and then I think we're also going to be able to find out where these people came from, and I think also with our great resources and our dedication, we're going to find out where they are, and then we're going to go get them.
General Downing, Mr. Kennedy, I thank you both very much. I know it's been a long day for both of you, and you've been very generous with your time to us and our colleagues. I do want to add a story that I read on one of the wire services just before coming on the air this evening. I believe it is unconfirmed. I should say that it comes from an Arab news agency, but there are reports that Osama bin Laden is being held under house arrest by the Taliban authorities in Afghanistan. Again, as I say, that is an unconfirmed story, but the story goes on to say that his weapons have been taken away from him, as have the weapons of some of his supporters, and that he is being held under house arrest, I believe, in the Afghan capital of Kabul. Nightline's Chris Bury is in Nashville, Tennessee tonight. He is one of many Americans who is stranded and unable to return to his home city. We have that in common. You're in Tennessee, I'm in London for the same reason. You can't get there from here. Chris, talk about this larger problem now of transportation in the United States. Do you have any sense of when things are going to start getting back to normal?
The air traffic system is moving very, very slowly to get up and going again. United Airlines, for example, has begun to ferry empty planes to airports around the country to pre-position them for when passenger traffic resumes. After that, the top priority is moving passengers whose planes were diverted yesterday from their destination airports, including about 250 international flights diverted to Canada and about 650 domestic flights that were ordered to land at various airports around the country.
The scene here at Nashville's airport was eerily quiet this afternoon.
For a second straight day, all 400 flights in and out were canceled. Southwest Airlines, the major carrier here, says it won't resume any service until Thursday. 16 commercial planes were diverted to Nashville in the moments after the attack. Late today, just a handful of passengers hung on to some hope they could get out soon, including these women who'd been on a flight from Hartford to Houston when the plane was suddenly ordered to land in Nashville.
They told us to wait in the airport because that's how we would know when our plane was leaving, that all new flights were canceled. Nobody could book new flights or, get out of here except the ones that were just diverted to Nashville.
All of them were sporting patriotic ribbons, courtesy of a Nashville resident who had offered meals and lodging to stranded passengers.
People ought to show their solidarity, so I brought my ribbons if anybody wanted to, wear one or whatever.
Here, as in airports across the country, the FAA's new security directives announced today were just taking hold. All airports were ordered to display an increased police presence. Curbside check-in has been banned, along with off-site check-in at airport hotels. To comply with the new guidelines, major airports must conduct searches with bomb-sniffing dogs. Only ticketed passengers will be allowed in the gate area. No knives of any kind can be carried or sold. In Memphis today, we saw tow trucks out enforcing the new FAA directive, banning any cars within 300 feet of the terminal building. A nasty surprise when their owners return, but for now, at least, passengers seem resigned to the added inconvenience the extra security will mean.
I think it's something we have to do. If we have to have more security to make it safe to travel, we've got to do it. It may be inconvenient, but I thought all day yesterday, how did this happen?
Tonight, law enforcement sources are telling us that hundreds of federal agents, U.S. Customs, Border Patrol, U.S. Marshals, hundreds of federal agents will be fanning out tomorrow at 17 major airports around the country, obviously both to protect passengers and as a psychological show of force. But as to the larger question you raised, exactly when will air traffic resume in this country, no one tonight has a very good answer. Ted?
Chris, do you have any idea, if you can just give me a quick answer, any idea of what still needs to be done? What is it that is holding up the resumption of normal air traffic?
There's a lot of confusion because of these FAA directives. Some of them apply to the airports, for example, the ban on curbside check-in. Others apply to the airlines, for example, a new directive today that comprehensive searches must be made of aircraft after the catering and after the cleaning. But it's not clear who's supposed to conduct those searches. Is it the flight attendants? Is it the maintenance people? Is it the pilots? Those sorts of questions all have to be sorted out. The FAA has to be happy with the response of the airports and the airlines before it's going to give the green light.
Chris Bury, many thanks. New York City is usually known as a place of hustle and bustle. Today it was anything but. I'm going to go back now once again to my Nightline colleague Michelle Martin, who has a report.
Morning on the day after. Today brought to light the awful incongruity. A beautiful day, and with it, a new understanding of the devastation. Visible for the first time was the extent of the damage to the buildings surrounding the World Trade Center. Buildings were buckling, windows were blown out, and the task ahead seemed monumental.
We've seen devastation, but this was the worst. This was the worst we've ever seen. Bodies everywhere. Terrible.
The strain of the mission was clear on the faces of these firefighters. Most had been there all night. At about 7 a.m., what would have been the height of morning rush hour, New York Mayor Rudy Giuliani was one of the few people moving through the streets of Manhattan. He was on his way to encourage exhausted workers.
Thank you for your help. Gentlemen, thank you very much for your help. Thank you.
And to tour the damage by daylight.
some recovery of victims, recovery of remains. We may have found 1 or 2 viable remains, but I wouldn't, not for public consumption, so to speak. Terrific effort. Everybody's working hard, sir.
I can see that. They did a great job. I can't tell you how much clearer this looks than yesterday. Unbelievable. Great job. Within 12 hours. Great job.
Even as the reality of the unimaginable set in, it was hard even for New York's voluble mayor to cope with the loss of one of New York's most famous landmarks.
Everything's relative when you look up there and you don't see the World Trade Center. It's unbelievable.
There were signs of hope.
We have been successful in recovering at least one other person, a Port Authority police officer. We're hopefully going to be able to recover a 4th one, and we're in the process of doing everything we can to try to locate other people.
But those were small glimmers in a day when it became clear that the odds for survivors were very small. As the day progressed and the cleanup continued, the promised reinforcements arrived, and the image of the National Guard taking to the streets of the city seemed both ominous yet reassuring at the same time. The incongruities continued. In the rest of Manhattan, blocks away from Ground Zero, empty streets in Midtown in the middle of the afternoon, reports ABC's James Walker.
It's 1:45 p.m. and I'm standing here on 8th Avenue at the corner of 40th Street. And any other day, I could never do this. Parked over there would be dozens of taxi cabs waiting to pick up hundreds of thousands of commuters who use the Port Authority building to go back and forth from New Jersey. Today, the Port Authority building is closed. And also closed major tourist centers such as Lincoln Center and the Metropolitan Museum of Art and the Empire State Building. The mood in this city is very serious and very somber.
We would urge people to go back to normal as much as possible, to go to restaurants, go shopping, do things, show that you're not afraid, and show confidence in yourself and in the city.
Many New Yorkers took that advice to heart. While the airports remained closed, these cars were headed into Manhattan this afternoon. As hard as they tried to achieve a sense of normalcy, however, many could not. Usually crowded shopping areas were closed and locked. Rush hours were empty. Commutes were